The European Central Bank has just made a statement that sent shockwaves through every financial capital on the planet. Christine Lagarde stood before the press, her words measured but heavy with implication. The tools they've relied on for over a decade are no longer effective. The era of unlimited monetary intervention is coming to an end, and what comes next could reshape the entire European economy. This isn't just another policy adjustment. This is an admission that the safety nets we've trusted are fraying at the edges. If you're watching this, you need to understand what this means for your savings, your job, and your future. Drop a comment below telling me which European country you think will be hit hardest by what's coming. And if you want to stay ahead of the economic collapse that mainstream media won't fully explain, hit that subscribe button right now. Let's dive into the 4 critical dimensions of this crisis that nobody is talking about. The ECB's admission didn't come out of nowhere. For years, central bankers across Europe have been walking a tightrope, balancing inflation concerns against the risk of recession. Since the 2008 financial crisis, the ECB has pumped trillions of euros into the financial system through quantitative easing programs, buying government bonds and corporate debt to keep interest rates artificially low. The idea was simple: make borrowing cheap, encourage spending and investment, and keep the economy growing. But that strategy has reached its breaking point. Throughout 2024 and into early 2025, inflation in the Eurozone remained stubbornly high despite aggressive interest rate hikes. Energy prices, still elevated from the fallout of geopolitical tensions, combined with supply chain disruptions that never fully resolved after the pandemic. The ECB raised rates repeatedly, pushing them to levels not seen in over 15 years. Yet inflation barely budged, hovering around targets that seemed increasingly impossible to meet. Meanwhile, the real economy started to crack under the pressure. Germany, the economic engine of Europe, slipped into technical recession. Manufacturing output collapsed as high energy costs made production uncompetitive. France struggled with massive public debt and social unrest as pension reforms and austerity measures sparked nationwide protests. Italy's debt-to-GDP ratio climbed to dangerous levels, raising fears of another sovereign debt crisis like the one that nearly destroyed the euro in 2012. The ECB found itself in an impossible position. Keep raising rates to fight inflation, and you risk crushing economic growth and triggering a wave of defaults across southern Europe. Cut rates or restart quantitative easing, and you fuel inflation further while destroying the credibility of the central bank. For months, officials insisted they had the situation under control, that their models showed a path forward. But behind closed doors, panic was setting in. Then came the admission. In a press conference that financial analysts are calling the most significant moment in ECB history since the euro crisis, Lagarde acknowledged what many had suspected. The central bank's conventional tools are exhausted. Interest rates are already high, and raising them further would cause more damage than benefit. The balance sheet is bloated from years of bond purchases, leaving little room for additional stimulus without risking currency devaluation. And the political divisions within the Eurozone make coordinated fiscal policy nearly impossible. This is where things get truly frightening. When a central bank admits it's out of options, it's essentially telling the world that market forces will now dictate outcomes, not policy interventions. That means volatility, uncertainty, and pain for ordinary citizens. The carefully managed economic stability of the past decade was always artificial, propped up by unprecedented monetary policy. Now that those supports are being removed, we're about to see what the European economy really looks like without them. Let's talk about what this means for the average European household. For years, low interest rates meant cheap mortgages and affordable consumer credit. Millions of families bought homes, started businesses, or financed their lives with the assumption that borrowing costs would remain manageable. But as rates have climbed, those calculations have been thrown into chaos. Monthly mortgage payments have doubled or even tripled for those on variable rate loans. Small businesses that relied on cheap credit lines are suddenly facing bankruptcy as their financing costs spiral out of control. The housing market, which has been one of the few bright spots in the European economy, is now showing serious signs of stress. In cities like Amsterdam, Dublin, and Lisbon, property prices skyrocketed during the years of easy money, creating a massive wealth effect, but also pricing out an entire generation of young people. Now, as borrowing becomes more expensive and economic uncertainty grows, transaction volumes are plummeting. Homeowners who bought at the peak are trapped, unable to sell without taking devastating losses. Unemployment is creeping upward across the continent. Retailers are closing stores as consumer spending contracts. The hospitality sector, which was supposed to roar back after the pandemic, is struggling as tourists cut back on travel amid economic worries. And the manufacturing sector, particularly in Germany and northern Italy, is facing a crisis of competitiveness. High energy costs, strict environmental regulations, and competition from China have combined to make European factories increasingly unviable. Youth unemployment remains catastrophically high in countries like Spain and Greece, where entire generations have come of age knowing nothing but economic crisis. These young people watch their parents' generation enjoy prosperity, only to inherit an economy of precarious gig work, unaffordable housing, and diminishing social services. The social contract that held European societies together, the promise that hard work would lead to security and prosperity, is breaking down. The political implications of the ECB's admission are equally explosive. Across Europe, populist movements on both the left and right have been gaining strength, fueled by economic anxiety and anger at technocratic elites. When Christine Lagarde admits that the central bank is out of options, she's handing ammunition to every politician who has been saying the system is broken. Far-right parties in France, Italy, the Netherlands, and Germany are already seizing on this moment, arguing that the euro itself is the problem and that national sovereignty over monetary policy must be restored. The European project, which has been the defining political achievement of the post-war era, is under existential threat. The euro was supposed to bind Europe together, creating economic integration that would make war impossible and prosperity shared. But instead, it has created a system where Germany and Northern Europe accumulate surpluses, while Southern Europe accumulates debt, with no mechanism for redistribution or adjustment. The ECB's admission exposes this fundamental flaw. A monetary union without fiscal union cannot survive sustained economic stress. We're already seeing cracks in European unity. Poland and Hungary have been at odds with Brussels over rule of law issues for years. France and Germany, the traditional axis of European leadership, are increasingly divided over how to respond to the economic crisis. Italy's government has been openly defiant of EU budget rules, arguing that austerity would be political suicide. And across the continent, citizens are questioning whether the benefits of EU membership outweigh the costs. Now let's address what almost no mainstream analyst is willing to say out loud. The ECB's predicament is fundamentally about the limits of debt-based economic systems. For decades, Western economies have grown primarily through credit expansion. Governments, corporations, and households have all taken on massive amounts of debt, betting that future growth would make those obligations manageable. Central banks enabled this through ever lower interest rates and massive money printing. But debt can only grow faster than the economy for so long, before mathematics catches up with reality. Europe is now at that point. Total debt across the Eurozone exceeds 300% of GDP when you combine government, corporate, and household obligations. That's not sustainable, especially when economic growth is stagnant or negative. The only way to manage that debt burden is through inflation, letting the real value of the obligations erode over time, or through default, which would trigger a financial catastrophe. The ECB tried to thread the needle, keeping rates low enough to prevent defaults while claiming to fight inflation. But that strategy has failed. Inflation has remained too high for comfort, eroding purchasing power and fueling political anger. Meanwhile, the debt burden continues to grow, and the risk of default, particularly for highly indebted Southern European countries, increases every day. The central bank's admission that it's out of options is really an admission that this debt supercycle has reached its terminal phase. What happens next is genuinely unpredictable because we're in uncharted territory. No major economy has ever accumulated this much debt while facing demographic decline, energy transition costs, and geopolitical instability simultaneously. Europe's population is aging rapidly, meaning fewer workers supporting more retirees, which puts massive strain on pension and healthcare systems. The transition away from fossil fuels, while necessary for environmental reasons, requires trillions in investment that Europe doesn't have. And the war in Ukraine has reminded everyone that peace and stability cannot be taken for granted. Some analysts are predicting a Japanese-style lost decade, where Europe muddles through with low growth, high debt, and increasing social friction. Others fear something more catastrophic, a sovereign debt crisis that breaks the euro apart, triggering competitive devaluations and economic nationalism. There's even discussion of a potential banking crisis, as European banks hold massive amounts of government bonds that would plummet in value if countries defaulted or left the euro. The most likely scenario is a messy combination: continued economic stagnation punctuated by acute crises in individual countries, forcing repeated emergency interventions that paper over problems without solving them. The ECB may be out of conventional options, but that doesn't mean they won't try unconventional measures. Expect talk of helicopter money, debt monetization, or even modern monetary theory-style fiscal monetary coordination. These would be desperate measures, acknowledging that the old playbook has failed. For individuals trying to navigate this crisis, the implications are profound. Cash savings are being eroded by inflation, but the alternatives are risky in their own ways. The stock market is volatile and overvalued by historical standards. Real estate is entering a downturn in many markets. Gold and other hard assets might offer protection, but they don't generate income. Cryptocurrency remains speculative and highly volatile, despite growing institutional adoption. The safest approach is probably diversification combined with resilience. Hold some cash for liquidity, some hard assets as inflation protection, and skills or income streams that aren't dependent on a single employer or industry. Build community connections and don't rely solely on government systems that may be overstretched or underfunded. The economic security that previous generations took for granted is evaporating, and individuals need to adapt accordingly. One aspect that deserves deeper examination is the role of the United States in all of this. The Federal Reserve has been dealing with similar challenges: high inflation, massive debt, political pressure. But the dollar's status as the global reserve currency gives America options that Europe lacks. When the Fed prints money, much of that inflation gets exported to other countries that hold dollars. Europe doesn't have that luxury. The euro is a major currency, but it doesn't have the same global dominance, which means European inflation stays primarily in Europe. This dynamic creates a dangerous feedback loop. As the ECB struggles and European economic prospects dim, capital flows out of Europe and into dollar-denominated assets. This weakens the euro, which makes imports more expensive, which fuels more inflation, which forces the ECB to keep rates higher, which further damages the economy. It's a vicious cycle that reinforces European economic weakness relative to the United States. China factors into this equation as well. For years, China was a major export market for European manufacturers, particularly German automakers and machinery producers. But China's economy is facing its own serious challenges: a real estate bubble, demographic decline, tensions with the West over trade and technology. Chinese demand for European goods has fallen sharply, removing another pillar of European economic strength. Meanwhile, Chinese manufacturers are becoming increasingly competitive in industries where Europe once dominated, from automobiles to renewable energy equipment. The geopolitical dimension adds another layer of complexity. The war in Ukraine has forced Europe to fundamentally rethink its security posture and energy strategy. For decades, European defense spending was minimal because NATO and the United States provided security guarantees. Russian energy provided cheap heating and industrial power. Both of those assumptions have been shattered. Europe now needs to spend massively more on defense while simultaneously investing in energy infrastructure to replace Russian gas and oil. These investments are necessary, but they come at the worst possible time economically. Government budgets are already stretched, debt levels are high, and private sector investment is constrained by high interest rates and economic uncertainty. Europe needs to invest trillions in defense, energy transition, digital infrastructure, and social support systems, but it doesn't have the money or the borrowing capacity to do so without risking a debt crisis. The ECB's admission of being out of options needs to be understood in this broader context. It's not just about interest rates or inflation, it's about a European model that's being stress-tested from multiple directions simultaneously and showing fundamental weaknesses. The comfortable assumption that technocratic management could smooth out economic cycles and maintain prosperity has proven false. We're entering a period where economic pain is unavoidable, and the only question is how it will be distributed. Looking at specific countries reveals how unevenly this crisis will impact Europe. Germany, despite its current recession, remains relatively strong with low unemployment and substantial industrial capacity. But it faces a massive structural challenge as its export-driven model becomes less viable in a fragmenting global economy. France has greater domestic consumption to fall back on, but its massive public debt and political instability create vulnerability. Italy has been the sick man of Europe for 2 decades, and this crisis could finally force a reckoning with its unsustainable debt load. Spain and Portugal have made significant progress since their crises in the early 2010s, but they remain heavily dependent on tourism and foreign investment, both of which will suffer in a broader downturn. Greece never fully recovered from its previous disaster and could easily slip back into crisis. The Netherlands and the Nordic countries are generally in better shape, but they're not immune to contagion effects from troubles elsewhere in the Eurozone. Eastern European members of the EU face their own unique challenges. Countries like Poland and Romania have been success stories, growing rapidly as they integrated into European supply chains and received substantial EU funds. But that growth model is now threatened by economic slowdown in Western Europe, potential cuts to EU funding, and geopolitical tensions with Russia. These countries have less fiscal space to respond to crisis and could see rapid deterioration in living standards. The timeline for how this all unfolds is crucial but uncertain. Economic crises can simmer for years before reaching a breaking point, or they can accelerate with shocking speed. The 2008 financial crisis went from contained subprime issues to global panic in a matter of months. The European debt crisis of 2011 to 2012 brought the euro to the brink of collapse seemingly overnight. We could be in the early stages of a slow-motion disaster that takes years to fully manifest, or we could be just weeks away from an acute crisis that forces emergency action. What we know for certain is that the ECB's admission has changed the psychological landscape. Markets and citizens now understand that the central bank's safety net has limits. That knowledge changes behavior. Investors become more cautious, consumers save more and spend less, and businesses defer investment. These rational individual decisions create collective outcomes that worsen the economic situation, a classic paradox of thrift scenario. The feedback loops are already visible. As economic uncertainty grows, credit conditions tighten further even without additional ECB rate hikes. Banks become more selective about lending, requiring higher interest rates and more collateral. This credit tightening has the same effect as monetary policy tightening, but without the central bank actively doing anything. The economy slows, unemployment rises, and the risk of defaults increases, which makes banks even more cautious. The cycle feeds on itself. Breaking this cycle traditionally requires either a dramatic policy intervention or a painful adjustment where debts are written off and failed businesses liquidate. The ECB's admission suggests the first option is no longer available, which means we're heading toward the second. That's what "it's over" really means. The era of central banks preventing painful adjustments is ending, and we're about to experience the economic rebalancing that's been delayed for over a decade. For viewers trying to make sense of their personal situations in light of this, the key is to recognize that the rules have changed. The strategies that worked during the era of easy money and central bank support will not work in what comes next. Aggressive leverage, betting on endless asset price appreciation, assuming government support will always be there, these are now dangerous assumptions. The new environment will reward caution, flexibility, diversification, and skills that remain valuable regardless of economic conditions. This crisis represents not just an economic challenge, but a political and social reckoning. The European model of high social spending, strong worker protections, and technocratic governance was built during decades of economic growth and demographic expansion. That foundation is crumbling. The choices ahead are genuinely difficult. Cutting social programs causes immediate suffering, but maintaining them without growth means eventual bankruptcy. There are no good options, only hard trade-offs. The ECB's admission is ultimately an admission that those trade-offs can no longer be avoided through monetary magic tricks. Reality is reasserting itself after years of financial engineering and can-kicking. Europe faces a decade of difficult choices, economic stagnation, and political turmoil. The continent that once seemed like humanity's best answer to combining prosperity with social solidarity is entering its most uncertain period since World War II. That's not hyperbole. It's simply what the central bank itself has now acknowledged.